Everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I know many of you were not on the one last week. So just as a quick refresher, mostly that first one was getting familiar with a lot of the terminology that, and I had a handout for that you could read. And also just giving some just basic information about grant writing and how much of the work, for those of you who missed it, and the reason that I think I have about a 90 some odd percent success rate, and I brought in over $100 million doing grant writing on a very part-time basis, like maybe a third of my time or a fourth of my time is spent doing that, and only for a few months of the year, is because I start writing long before there's ever a funding opportunity. I know that most people that are in programs or tribal programs know what they need. And so it's a matter of documenting that need and knowing that every grant, no matter who the funder is, pretty much always asks for you to identify the need, describe what you're going to do about the need, your approach or your methods to address that need. The third one is usually your corporate capability or your tribal capacity to do what you say you're going to do, kind of like your organizational capacity. And then the staffing and the evaluation and a budget. Almost every grant has something similar in the way of topics. So there's no reason why you can't kind of start writing long before there's an opportunity. And then you're really more like editing, than starting with a blank page. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the new PowerPoint. So are you going to share your screen?
So, yep, go ahead.
Okay, all right. And then let's see here. So we say, okay, I don't see where it says for me to do. Oh, wait, here, one more, hold on. Let's see if this will work. Share screen. Okay, good. Okay, so can you see it now, the PowerPoint? Yep. And I'll put it in the right view.
Yep, okay. We can see it.
Slideshow. There we go. Okay, that work?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. And first I know we only have an hour and a half and this moves very quickly. And when we're in person, it's a lot more interactive. We break up into groups and you do little assignments and we come back together. So this is kind of a grand experiment without all of that. Wish we were in person. But is there anybody from last week that wanted to share if they found any new funding opportunity or anything in the chat that they want us to know about before we start module 2 today? We'll just give you just a couple seconds if you want us to, if you want to talk about anything you might have found in the way of funding. And then Megan, you'll let me know if we see any, right? Now, are my pictures of everybody here covering up the PowerPoint?
Nope, I can see it.
Okay, all right.
Over to the left on my screen. I'm not sure what they are for you, but I think other people can move their own around.
Good, okay. So the learning objectives today, we're going to describe a process for reviewing a funding opportunity or a grant application and documenting key information and what we call fatal criteria. We're going to list 3 examples of fatal criteria to avoid, and then also participate in some learning activities through interactive and self-directed work. So last week we talked about, look for funding opportunities. I shared 2 new ones that had come out that tribes were eligible for. They came out last week. They weren't very big. I want to say $95,000. One was for family networks and the other was for consumer networks. And if you go to samhsa.gov, SAMHSA, samhsa.gov, you'll see both of those funding opportunities. I believe they're due January 4th, which is great because some of the last year, I know we were getting, like 20 days of writing time and that was it. So at least now, especially being during holidays, we have a couple of months, which is great. So if you have any comments about any of your homework assignment and you want to discuss it anytime today, feel free to bring that up. So what I want to do is walk through a process that I use when a funding opportunity does become available, how to use as much of that information in your grant writing as you can. So first, obviously, read the entire funding opportunity announcement. This little thumbnail photo to the right is one that we're going to practice on today, which many of you have already received this grant. It's the Tribal Behavioral Health Grant Program called Native Connections. And I'm just going to use that for purposes of illustration. This is a grant that is usually out every year or two. This was from a couple of years ago. So first we look at, assess your viability. Like, what are the chances of getting this? Typically, I will not write a grant that only has 5 or 6 unless I know that this group that would get the grant award, that tribe, that organization, that county, depending on whoever the applicant is, if what they're doing, if they are super well known for this topic, or they have a real track record at doing the topic of the grant, or they're just almost a household name, or they have a lot of data showing that what they can do on that topic, whether it's suicide or pregnancy prevention or whatever it is, unless they're really in that upper competitive echelon, I don't normally apply for ones when there's, 4, 5, 6 kind of thing. I prefer there to be at least closer to 10 or more, especially if it's a grant that involves a lot of time and energy, because typically for these SAMHSA grants, and they're the sponsor of this grant writing course, typically in the SAMHSA grants, it varies by topic, but the ones I'm familiar with get anywhere from 200 to sometimes 300 or 400 applicants, and they might fund a handful, so you got to look at the odds. Now, the good thing about some of the tribal programs is the most recent one called Tribal Opioid Response. It was only open to tribes, and they were making room for like 300 tribes to apply, and they only got, I think, 130 or something. So that's good if you're wanting a good shot at getting something. It's bad in the sense that, we really needed more tribes to apply. So in some cases, you've got where tribes are the only applicants, but most often it's tribes are kind of fighting along with states or communities in non-tribal locations for the same pot of money. So I look at the overall amount. This is a great one because they're gonna fund 39, and these are, I think, exclusively tribes. And it's a decent amount of money, $250,000 a year, and you get a 5-year run, which is great, because that's one of my complaints of writing grants over the years is you put a lot of time and energy into getting it, and then it takes you a year to get it up and running, and you're closing it out in the last year. So really your second year, if it's a 3-year grant, you're just getting it going and everything's going well, and then it's time to close it back down in year 3. So it's nice when you have a 5-year run, gives you time to really get things up and running. So I use highlighters. I do prefer to print these out and get several different color highlighters, and I like to read it in writing. I know mostly younger people prefer to scroll on the screen, but I want you to know that the highlighting concept can be done even online using color highlighters, and I'll show you how I do it. I read it through at least twice. The first time I'm literally with the highlighters and I'm really documenting critical information and what I call fatal flaws, which are things like page limits or time that something is due, or if you had to have a letter of intent in order to be considered, then that would be a fatal flaw if you didn't do it. If there was, font size limits, something that if you went over it or made a mistake on it, your grant would not even be reviewed. That's what I call a fatal flaw. And so I'll show you some examples. So these are the fatal flaws that I look for. Sometimes too, they'll say a grant is due at 11:59 p.m. Well, that's Eastern time. And so because that's the DC in this case, SAMHSA would be Eastern time. If it's a state application, that may not be the case. It might be in your own time zone, but pay very close attention to, the deadlines, including, like I said, the time zone. Also, the other, other things you have to do, like signing up to be in the you have to have an ERA Commons account, and sometimes these things take weeks to get done. So you want to immediately, if you're not already in the system for, and this is again for SAMHSA, you'll want to do that in advance. I'm covering SAMHSA today, but obviously this could be Centers for Disease Control. It could be, I was telling you last week, Administration of Children and Families, ACF, has a lot of substance abuse, pregnancy prevention, homeless, runaway, HIV, homeless youth, runaway, HIV prevention, lots of different grants. And a lot of people forget about the Administration for Children and Families, but that's a good funder as well as SAMHSA. So I take the highlighter and I'll highlight things like this: the due date, the exact time, what time zone it's in. In this case, it said federally recognized American Indian, Alaska Native tribes and tribal organizations are able, and also in this case, you can be a consortia of tribes or tribal organizations. I did add this next slide in. This is a different grant, but I want to show you how different eligibility can be. The grant that's out right now for SAMHSA, called Consumer Network Program, it's called a statewide one, even though they make it eligible for tribes. So it has to be a tribe-wide or a statewide effort. They're only going to fund one in a state, or if it's a tribe, it has to serve the whole tribe. And so you'll see here that you cannot be well, eligibility is limited to domestic, private, and public nonprofits, tribes, and urban Indian organizations that are mental health consumer operated organizations for at least 2 years and that are not operating under the umbrella of another organization. So these are like things, if you make a mistake here and you are one of, you are part of, let's say, an umbrella organization, they're going to see your application and they're going to discard it. So anything like this, that's fatal flaw. I put it, it's in pink, but basically I think of it as being red, like this is really urgent. Making sure that, and the number of years experience, sometimes you may not have the number of years experience, but maybe there's a partner in your community that has that. And maybe you can partner with them, and that way you can, and I've done that a lot, where we'll apply under another organization and maybe it's a 5-year grant and we'll say, we only have 1 year of experience, we need 2. So we'll apply with you as a partner, but we want a bigger share of the pie in each subsequent year, so that by the time we get to the last year, let's say in a 5-year grant, that we're really kind of leading our own initiative as a way to kind of get that experience that you need to be eligible. You'll see language like this in a lot of the grant applications. Recipients who receive funding under these other different awards are not eligible to apply. So you just read everything so carefully and double check everything. And you could make this in pink or red highlight just to remind yourself. In this case, going back to Native Connections, it's very clear that the population that you have to serve is youth through the age of 24. So if you put in programs serving other populations of age groups, it would be discarded. So again, that's why I would make this pink. The font size is key. The font type, which in this case is Times New Roman, they want 1-inch margins. You're allowed to use size 10 for charts or tables. That's very important to know, because what you'll see as we go through this course is I use a lot of charts and tables, mostly because I was a grant reviewer for many years, and it's really hard to follow pages and pages of narrative, especially when you're reviewing, 8 or 10 grants at a time, and it's easy to get them all confused. So I always loved it when there was like an at a glance. I could look at something, I could see how it all fit together, or you could see it in a chart. It kind of comes together easier, and it was easier to remember. So I'm a big chart and graph fan, and we'll talk about that as we go. Also here, you had to submit your application in a PDF format. Again, these are fatal flaws. If you don't do it, it'll be kicked out of the system. So I put it in pink. I don't think this is really a fatal flaw, though I did put it in pink. Used to be that you could put colorful photos and colorful graphs and things in. And when the grants would get copied off for the grant reviewers in hard copy, they would often be done in black and white, not color ink. So they're telling you, don't bother to put things in color, because whatever they send out to their reviewers is going to be in black and white. So it defeats the purpose of being in color. I don't believe you would, your grant would get kicked out if you had color in one of your charts or graphs. It's just that your reader may not be able to distinguish the color. So it's best to use just different shades of gray. And there's a way, if you have a color photo or other color items, that you can just right click on it and it'll give you a chance to convert it into gray or black, shades of black, black and white. So I'll use colorful things. I'll just change them at the last minute. Luckily, SAMHSA has gotten very good. Used to be 30 or 35 page applications. Now they're all pretty much 10 pages, single spaced. One time I was in a hurry and I only went through the grant like I'm doing now, going through the criteria one time instead of twice. And I missed that it was said double spaced. And I was like, I got that thing so tight. I was praying over every word. Everything was perfect. I was about an hour before I was ready to upload. And I went back and did a quick QA, quality assurance, against the criteria, and somehow caught that it said double spaced. And I had an hour to cut my grant down to half, which is like, you just never want to be in that position. So I did get it, actually. I did it and I got the grant, which was kind of shocking. I thought I had for sure lost that one because I was pretty random when you're having an hour to cut that much text. So every funder is different. Some will be double spaced, some will be single spaced, but again, making sure that you are getting all of this down in your review of the application itself. And so I use a green highlighter, anything to do with money, because normally someone else develops the budget. It's very, very hard to be the one that does all the writing of the narrative and to fool with the budget. You have to work closely with the budget person to make sure that if you're calling a position a project director, that they don't put it as a project coordinator in the budget. It should be always verify your terms are the same, the names of the positions are the same, and that they're making sure that everything you're required to do is budgeted. For example, a lot of times there'll be a section on cultural competency, and the grant writer might say, well, we're going to do once a quarter cultural competency training, but then you go to the budget and it doesn't even get mentioned in there. Well, that makes the reviewer think you're just telling us what we want to hear, that you're not really committed to cultural competency because you didn't put it in the budget. Now, maybe it's something that is not budgeted. Maybe it's something that your tribe might provide at no cost, for example. Well, then you might want to put it in the budget and put $0 for dollars and put an asterisk that says offered in kind. So at least they know that you are tracking or mapping your exact narrative to your budget. So in this instance, I highlighted in green that no more than 20% of the grant award for any budget period can be used, no more than that, for data collection and performance assessment, and for incentives for individuals that are participating in like the GIPRA data collection tool. You can give them an incentive of up to $30 for every time they come in and fill out data forms. So all that gets budgeted, but 20% of your grant or less can be spent on this, not 21% or more. So again, that's why it would be highlighted in green. And then I also highlighted that there's other places to look at for funding restrictions. There's like, if you go to that appendix, it'll say you can't spend it on construction of more than, I think it was 75,000. And there's rules about that. And what's even eligible to be in a construction budget, because not all grants would allow it. It tells you here you can't exceed 250,000 in any year. And if you do come in higher than that, they're just not going to review your grant for the most part. Only time I've seen them do the review, even if you've missed something like this, is if they don't get enough applications, and maybe they're going to be a little more liberal in how they look at things. But I also highlighted here that there is no match required, which that's always great. This is something that probably about half the grants that I've reviewed missed. And this is in almost every SAMHSA grant. It's very clear They want the project director at full-time, 1.0 FTE, one full-time equivalent level of effort. And yet with this in here, and I'm not kidding, about half the grants I reviewed would have a 50% or 25% project director. They do not want that. They want full-time because they want to make sure that this grant is implemented properly. And they feel like if you're only putting a fraction of the person in as project director, then you're not taking it seriously and that it's not going to be well implemented. So then I use a different color highlighter, usually yellow, for other things that are very critical to the writing of the grant, but where it doesn't necessarily involve budget or doesn't involve a fatal flaw per se. But they want your program to be fully implemented by the 4th month of the project. Now, some people take that as the 4th month being, you know, the beginning, first day of the 4th month, and some construe it to be the last day of the month 4, you know. So you'll work that out with your project officer, or you can ask a question if you're not sure. I usually, to play it safe, will say, you know, that after 90 days pass, so my 3 months is over and I'm beginning my 4th month, that's when I start. So it might be like day 91, you know, of operating a grant. Now, just because you have to implement by the 4th month doesn't mean you have to implement in full scope. And so a lot of people forget this and they're thinking, oh my word, how, you know, I got to hire staff, I got to do all the startup. How am I going to get all my clients lined up and start running the full program in month 4? Well, you're just beginning implementation. So you might do a slow, gradual, you know, onboarding of clients and picking up a few each month, maybe. So maybe you're just hiring some of your staff and moving into becoming fully staffed in month 5 or 6. It really depends on what you're implementing, what makes sense here. I'm very big about using the grant application itself, to use it and reword certain key aspects of the grant application for your narrative. So for example, if the purpose of this program, and this is taken right off of the SAMHSA Notice of Funding Award, or notice of funding availability, their NOFA, or no, what do they call it? Funding Opportunity Announcement, I apologize, FOA, Funding Opportunity Announcement. So this is the application that you would be reading and then writing to. It says that the goal is to, or the purpose is to prevent suicide and substance misuse, reduce the impact of trauma, and promote mental health among American Indian Alaska Native youth through the age of 24. Well, what is also surprising to me as a former grant reviewer, I don't do that now, is how many people would miss the whole purpose of the program and write goals and objectives on completely different things. So really, for something as important as the overarching purpose or the overarching goal of the funder really needs to be your goal. So you can rewrite it a little bit. So you might say, you know, for the Sisseton Wahpeton tribe to prevent suicide, substance misuse, reduce the impact, or maybe you make this 2 different goals, but you just reword it and make sure that you're very clear that everything you do is to support that purpose or that overarching goal. So you can see here how it's just a slight reword makes that your project goal. I don't like this goal, by the way, only because there's too many things going on. I like to keep things simple, but this is how the funder worded it. So you're preventing suicide, you're preventing substance misuse, you're reducing the impact of trauma, you're promoting mental health. That's a lot of different things. And normally you could even break them down into separate areas, like separate goals, and have separate action steps. The problem is that a lot of these things overlap. So what you might do to prevent suicide might be a trauma reduction program. And so now where would you put all your steps, because they overlap so much? So if they merge all these multiple things together, I would tend to keep it as one big one also. And then just have discrete steps under the goal that address the various areas. And we'll cover some examples. So here's the other thing that is just amazing to me, again, as a former grant reviewer. SAMHSA is very clear. They give you a ton of required activities. So what's always so interesting to me is about half the grants that I've reviewed, it's like somebody read the funding opportunity announcement, put it in a drawer and forgot about it, whipped open a blank screen or a blank piece of paper and just went to town on whatever they wanted to write about or whatever they wanted to do for their tribal community. And I've reviewed a lot of non-tribal grants, or maybe their non-tribal community. But the issue is, it's almost as if they forgot all the things that the funder wanted them to do. So really, if you just to make sure that you are totally aligning what you are proposing to do in your tribe with what the funder is wanting to fund, it's always better to start out with their goal is your goal, again, with a slight rewrite, and their required activities become your objectives. Now, that doesn't mean you can't add other things that you would like to do, but at least make sure that the basic framework of what they are asking you to do, what they are funding you to do, is not forgotten. Just make sure all of that's in there. So this is the example. If their required activity is develop or revise protocols to ensure that youth do this or do that, then you would add a date, because remember, goals are broad themes, that are not necessarily measurable, like prevent substance use, reduce pregnancy, teen pregnancy, reduce sexually transmitted diseases, improve school attendance. So the goals are broad and they're generally not measurable, because you don't quantify them. But the objectives should be very much quantified. By such and such a date, we're going to implement this, or we're going to admit so many kids to treatment, or whatever it is you're doing. So you can see with a slight reword, by 1/1/2021, develop protocols to ensure kids at risk, yada, yada, yada. Again, I parroted it back. And so you can tweak the wording, but what you're trying to do here is just make sure that these required activities become your objectives. And that way you'll have alignment. And you can see all these are all the required activities that with slight rewording become your objectives. Now, because I know some of you might want prevention grants, I just want to show you that, whoops, went the wrong way, that if you're writing a prevention grant, then you might use words like, here are a framework. You can assess the need, you build capacity to address that need, you plan what you're going to do, you implement, and then you evaluate and sustain. So that's a way you might, a lot of times people just come up with these random goals, and it's better to have logical, thoughtful, goals that make sense, that kind of progress. So in prevention, you usually are assessing the conditions of a community and where the needs are. You then have to build capacity, workforce capacity. You got to train up some of your partners in the community. You got to have a plan of what you're going to do to implement your program. You implement, then you evaluate and sustain. Okay, want to stop there and see if we have any questions so far.
So far, none in the chat.
Okay.
But feel free, if you guys want to unmute, you can always talk and ask questions too.
Sounds good. So is that a question?
Nope, that was my phone. And
that was okay, no problem. Okay, all right. So what you want to do, you've got this application, you've gone through it, you've used all kinds of highlighters, and you have a good handle on what you're supposed to do. And now it comes time to start writing, unless you've done what I suggested last module, which is that you would go to your file on your computer and pull up all the text you've already been writing, in advance for whatever it is you're needing. So otherwise you'd start with that. But what you really don't want to have to do the grant on your own. If you can drag other hostages to the table and invite them to the party with you, you want to do that. You want to have a strong writer. You want to have a strong budget person. You want to have a program person. And by program person, I mean somebody who knows how to implement something. I'm going to just close the door here a minute. What happens too often is that you'll have some grant writer write up a grant application, submit it, and then it gets funded, and the people that have to implement the program get it back and say, wow, I would never have agreed to do this. Or like one told me last year, the grant writer wrote a program for all these youth, and we don't even have access to youth through any of our schools. They prohibit us from coming in it. So we would never in a million years have applied for this, you know? So again, you want that program person, if you're hiring grant writers or whatever, make sure they're really touching base with people who, you know, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And you want an evaluator, whoever's going to evaluate your program, whether it's an external evaluator like a university, sometimes it's too expensive to hire a university because their overhead is usually 60% of the money you give them goes to overhead. But maybe you hire a researcher that works for the university on the side, so you're just paying them hourly, or maybe it's an internal person to your tribe or somebody in your quality assurance division. But whoever that is should be involved from the beginning when you conceptualize the model, because the last thing you want to do is develop this whole fancy model, and then when you hand it off to the evaluator, they say, I can't evaluate this. I would never have written it like this. So having everybody together on the same page is great. It's very important to have a member of the population of focus or the target population, a consumer or a former consumer of your services as part of that team, even if they're not there for every meeting, or even if, you know, maybe you give them a little gas money or something to come help you, because not only do you want to make sure that it makes sense to whoever it is that is the end user, but you want to be able to let the grant writer know that you had a consumer or group of consumers that provided input into this application. That is worth points. You won't see points assigned, but I can assure you that if you make sure that these grant reviewers know in your writing that you cared enough about your population of focus, that you included them in some way in reviewing or selecting your approach or something like that, that sends a really positive message. And there's a number of ways to do that, but it's important. I always write, when I'm writing a grant, I am only writing to the grant reviewer. And I will even put lots of little things that say, reviewer note. Please note that I use the most recent data available. You know, maybe the data is 4 or 5 years old, but that was the most currently available. I don't want them to think I used old data. I don't want them to assume I use the most current. So I tell them, grant reviewer note, please, know that we use the most readily available data. Or if there was a lot of questions that you have to answer and you have a severe page restriction, I might say reviewer note, the copy of the full resume is available on file, was abbreviated here due to extreme page constraints, or, so I'm always talking to the reviewer. I never assume that they are in my head and they know why I'm doing things in a certain way. Also, it's good to have community collaborators that you intend to involve in your project. If you're funded, it's good to have them on the team. Now, does this mean that your grant writing team is going to have these people and they're going to come to every single meeting and work as a team from beginning to end? Maybe. Or maybe they only come to certain ones. It's up to you how you structure it. It may be that you're meeting so frequently that it's too difficult for a program person or an evaluator to be every single one. So this is just a guideline of, remember that these are folks that will add value in different ways. And it's always helpful to have a taskmaster, the one that is always writing herd. You were supposed to get me the abstract done by 5 o'clock today. Where is it? Or, hey, friendly reminder, everybody's draft is due tomorrow. Somebody who's just always writing herd, making sure these things are getting done. And then, so I already told you about those. Now, we used to call letters of support something and that you would want to have in your proposal. Now, most funders do not allow letters of support. They only allow what they call letters of collaboration. And there's a big difference. The difference between a letter of support and a letter of collaboration is that collaborators are usually true partners. And by true partners, it means they either share in the budget in some way, or that they share in other ways, like maybe a school is your partner and they give you an office to work in every week when you're there screening kids for drug abuse, or that you're working in a health department and they give you an office, or they give you, maybe they handle all the screening or the referrals, or maybe they're providing you a case manager, or maybe you're having somebody come in and do tutoring or literacy work. And so you've got these partners coming in and they have a key role. So the difference is that a letter of support is kind of a worthless, really non-committal letter, that basically is like a cheerleading letter. Like, oh, we really, like your organization and we wish you well in getting your grant. Okay, that's a lot. That's really a bunch of nothing. Whereas a letter of collaboration would be, thank you for working with us, and we were pleased to be a part of your development team and getting your proposal pulled together. If funded, we'll be pleased to provide the referrals every week for your program, or we'll be pleased to allow you to use our facility every Wednesday, or to come into our jail and do screenings, or where they're putting something on the table in writing and they're explaining that they have a key role in your project. So you really want those letters of collaboration. Sometimes you're limited to how many you can have. Sometimes you're limited to minimum number you have to have. Sometimes they're limited in other ways, how many pages they can be. I do believe in writing the letter of collaboration for my collaborators as a guideline. And that's because I know as the writer what needs to be in there. And so I make sure that I have 3 things in every letter of collaboration. I make sure that if I've worked with that group before, that I start the letter with that. So I pretend I'm them. And I would say, on behalf of the, Compton Literacy Organization, I am pleased to provide this letter of collaboration, to the so-and-so tribe. We have enjoyed our 10-year history of working together, or our 1 year, or whatever it is. And are pleased that we will have an opportunity to continue our partnership going forward. So I always put a little commercial, a little plug in that describes the length and tone and connectedness of this collaborator. And then I'll say, as we discussed in our planning calls or our planning meetings, because again, you want to involve these collaborators from the beginning, even if the meetings were brief, even if they were phone calls, in our planning together, as indicated in our planning meetings, if this project is funded, we agree to send you a literacy worker every Tuesday and Thursday to meet with your families from 2 to 4. I'm making this up as an example, but where they're being very concrete about what is that collaborator leveraging in to the mix, whether that's something you're going to fund them for or not, whatever role they play should be spelled out. And then, I'll say something at the end like, we would be happy to participate in any ongoing planning activities you might have. Please let us know the minute you learn of your grant award status, so that we can, begin timely implementation, something like that. So my letters, they're worded, they're like a piece of art. Okay. I would never trust a collaborator to know the funding opportunity announcement like I'm going to know it, having read it twice, having marked it all up with my markers, knowing what the funder wants, knowing what needs to be said. So I will draft this collaborative letter, send it off very early and say, this is an example of the kind of thing we're looking for. Please feel free to edit it as you'd like, add, subtract. In other words, make it yours, put it on your letterhead. Now, very infrequently do they get changed, for the most part, and that's usually a good thing. They'll come back just like they were worded. Now, the important thing here is it all has to be accurate. So in other words, I'm not making this up. I'm literally documenting what has been real in my community with this, arrangement, with these collaborations, and just making sure that that's adequately reflected in the letter of collaboration. That's why I would write them. So it's not doing anything untoward. It's not, what would be inappropriate is if you made stuff up. And it's also probably not too cool to say, just sign it. You want to say to them, please feel free to edit any of this, or to add or strengthen. And sometimes I'll put blanks. I'll say, as you're aware, our organization has been serving this community for 10 years, or I'll put blank years and I'll let that collaborator fill the blank in if I'm not sure. So anyway, we go back and forth sometimes with these. Make sure that if your proposal has to go through a whole extensive process in advance, that you know that. I've been working with tribal communities for about 2 decades now. And my first grant was a suicide prevention grant in Gallup, New Mexico. And it was the first tribe I had ever worked with. And I didn't understand that the grant had to go through the tribal leaders for approval. And I think there was a smoking, tobacco type ceremony. But either way, I didn't know that. So I thought I had all these days left to work on it. And then I got the phone call, hey, we need it like FedEx here in the morning. And I was just dying because I was nowhere near ready. And I had to pull an all-nighter and give them something that was substantially equivalent. It wasn't the full thing, but it got me close enough to buy time to get it done. And I wasn't allowed to make any changes from, I could make tweaks, but I had to keep it like it had been approved by the tribal leaders. So just make sure you're well aware of how this goes, any approval process that has to happen before it gets submitted, an internal process. So this is how I figure out how many pages, and this is if the funder doesn't prescribe your pages for you. Normally a funder will say, like SAMHSA will say, you get 10 pages. And sometimes it'll say approximately 1 page for this, approximately 2 pages for that. And that's what they mean. It's not hard and fast. You can go a little less or a little more, but I'm going to tell you how I do it. And again, this is just, you decide what works for you, but I'll take the total number of points, which is 100 points in this case for SAMHSA, and I divide each section's number of points that they're awarding by the total points. And that's how I determine how much real estate of the pages I'm going to devote to each section. So section A, and I'm making this up, is 20 points. Well, I'm allowed to have 10 pages. So 20 points divided, by 100 points means I could dedicate 2 pages to section A. And section B is worth the most points, 40 points. So I'm going to make sure that I do 4 pages of text narrative on section B, and so forth and so on. Now, a couple caveats to this. I almost always go over on my first section. And that's because I don't want to, that's where I know as a grant reviewer that I know I made up my mind pretty much by the very first section. And I know everybody I reviewed with will quietly admit the same, that they pretty much decide right out of the gate within your first section whether or not you're fundable, or whether they really are thinking you're going to make it in the funding pile. So that's why if it takes me a little longer than 2 pages to answer every single question and every nuance of that question perfectly, I'll go over the page a little bit there, and I'll just reduce that somewhere else in another section. Also, there is sometimes some redundancy where by the time you get to section B or C, you've already answered that question a few times. And so you can say, as mentioned in section A, or as mentioned in section B, or as reflected in our appendix, or whatever. You can sometimes, you don't always need as much space as you get further into the grant. But what will affect this is if you have certain sections that lend themselves to more readily to charts and graphs, you may not need as much page dedicated to those, because if you're able to use charts and graphs, you can go down to size 10 font for most funders. Again, always check the rules, no matter who you're applying for. But generally speaking, most funders allow the font size to be smaller in charts and graphs. Always ask if you're not sure. And that means you can usually jam a little more into a section if you can put it in a chart or graph. And then I also, my biggest pet peeve, and this is such a nightmare, is when a funder has a evaluation criteria where you get 10 points for this and 20 for this, and you have all these, points assigned, but they give you an entirely different format of questions to write your application. That's a nightmare when what you're asked to fill out in the way of an application format is different from how they assign points. And the best description I can give you of this is what I used last week. If you have ever gotten a job and you're given a job description and it says, here are 10 things you must do in your job description, boom, 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 lays it out. And so you do all that just like you're told. And then you get at the end of the year, your boss gives you an evaluation and he or she comes in with a completely different set of criteria and says, well, I'm marking you down because you didn't do a good job on your social marketing skills. And you say, well, wait a minute, here's my job description. That doesn't even mention social marketing. Well, I'm sorry, we're going to deduct points because you didn't include it. That's what I hate, when you have a writing format and an evaluation format that are not one and the same. They really should be one and the same. Most funders are now getting on board with that, but over the years there have been where then you have to have the outline that you're writing to and the review criteria here, and you were constantly going back and forth. Total nightmare. My punishment for someone who creates that nightmare is they should have to write a grant to their own format and let them figure out where they put all this junk, But luckily, SAMHSA does not do that. Their evaluation criteria, where you get your points assigned, is exactly what you write to. Be sure to contact the funder if you're allowed. Some funders have what they call a cone of silence, and you're not allowed to contact them. And many of them you are allowed to contact. And they've often told me, wow, I can't believe I get so few calls. And yet this is a really important thing. We're putting out millions of dollars. We want everybody to get it right. We want them to be clear on what they're doing. And we don't get a phone call even asking us any questions. So don't be afraid to reach out if you're allowed. It also sometimes helps to build a relationship with somebody who may end up being your future funder. So we're gonna show. Now I'm just gonna go live. Hold on, George. Can you get this dog? Go see Daddy. Anyway, I'm gonna show you how to go. How I do this. How to create a template. I'm hoping this is gonna work right. So let's see. Strap on your seatbelts. And so what I think I'm going to do here is to go to this hot link and see if this is what's going to happen. And if not, I have another way to try it. Okay, why is it not going? Oh, there it goes. Okay, so you'll have to tell me if this is, so did you see, did it go to yeah?
No,
okay.
So I think you have to share your screen where the link is being shown.
Oh, but so you guys aren't seeing it?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Say it again.
So if you go to stop sharing your slides and you
Okay.
the screen.
Do I go to new share? I see what you do. Okay. New share.
Yeah, it's kind of like just, yep, you got it.
Okay. So now this is SAMHSA.gov, and you can see right here, these are last year's. Okay, these were all due in 2020. But I'm going to show you how. So you go and you see all the different grants that are there. And I'm going to find the one that says, if you go now to the 2021, you're only going to see two grants. The two I reference, one is Family Network and the other is Consumer Network. And so they're all due in, those two are due in January, but I'm now going to find Native Connections. So here's what I do. Either one of these will work, but I click on the funding opportunity. Did it take you to this? Are you seeing where it's taking me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so I go down here to the very bottom and it gives you a choice of getting it in PDF or Word. I always take Word because that way I can manipulate it. And now I'm going to open Word, and hopefully this will open the funding opportunity. And I'll have to maybe share a different screen. Did you see it now switch over?
Yep, the Department
Yep.
of Health and Human Services at the top.
That's it. Okay. So this is the actual grant. And so what I do is I read this whole thing, like I told you, and I put all the different color highlights. But what I'm going to do is, just for purposes of illustration here, I'm going to show you, see all these required activities here. These are all the ones that become your objectives, and you can abbreviate them or, clean them up where they're not as long and rambly. But what I do is I go all the way, I'm probably making y'all seasick here, scrolling. After I've read the whole thing, I go all the way to the review criteria, and those are coming up right here. And I then start copying and pasting. Here we go, evaluation criteria, section A. So I literally start here and I copy all of this section A, go all the way to budget. Okay, I'll stop right there. And I copy it. And then I open a blank screen or a blank form, file, new, and I paste it on there. So all I've done is I've pasted the review criteria. Now what I'll do, because I already know that they require you to use Times New Roman, I go through and take it from Arial 12 and I make it Times New Roman 12. Now, this is what I do. Are you all being able to see what I'm doing here? Yeah?
Yep,
Okay.
we can see it.
All right, so I went here to, I go to paragraph, and I go to, I make 0 spaces. I want 0 before, 0 after, and single. That means I'm going to get the most amount of words I can possibly get, that I'm allowed to get, into the grant. Okay. I am going to quick check my margins, because I noticed that it said, I guess layout is margins can only be 1 inch. And I go here, make sure everything's 1 inch. Okay, good. Now, then, because I want to maximize my space, and by the way, I know people make fun of me for this right here, I always call it a nyit, but it's apparently called a show hide. I always turn this on. Right now it's off, but when you turn it on, you won't see it, all these things, if you print it out, but it lets you know where your spaces are. It's hard for me to write a grant without having that turned on, because it lets you know where you have extra spaces or if you have other formatting problems. What I'm doing is I'm getting rid of, see how the numbers indent? I don't want indented. What I'm now going to do is I'm even going to pull everything all the way out here so that I have, let's try this again. There we go. Let's try this one. I need to get everything pulled out to the margin. I don't want any indented, because by the time you do 10 pages of indented, you've lost probably half a page of narrative. So this right now, so now what I have is I always like to do this in capital, so that's very easy to see, because I let all my sections run together. So I don't start a new page with section B, section C. I let them all run together. So I capitalize them just so that the reader can distinguish. And then I usually will take this and I make it italicized in dark font, and I'll make this italicized in dark font. These are now my prompts. And I'll even put it like this. I make it, what do you call this? Colons. So now I'm literally ready to start typing my narrative. Okay, I'm going to make this not bold and not, there we go. So now I have no spaces between my section and my prompts, and I'm going to literally answer these questions. Now, when I'm done, I'm going to go back and put in number 1 and put in number 2 here. I took those numbers out, and I'm going to do them in a way where it won't indent it. So watch what happens. I just did a number 1. Now it indented, but if I do undo, it brings it right back where I wanted it. This is just a cool little formatting trick. Put in a number 2. It didn't indent it, which is good. I want everything to the full margin. So now what will happen is I'll either just leave the numbers in and I'll get rid of this whole prompt eventually, but I leave it into the bitter end, because this is where people really make mistakes in grant writing. They'll read this statement, identify the population of focus. That will be impacted in the targeted systems and agencies and the geographic, yada, yada, yada. And they'll just start writing general things. Well, I'll answer everything. Like normally, the grants that I normally write will say, identify the population of focus, include age, literacy, gender, gay, lesbian, transgender status, it'll tell you, ask you all these things. Or it'll say, for example, all these things. I will literally address every single thing in there. And then when I'm done, I'll just to reduce the amount of space, I might just call this, I might either make this number 1, or I just might call this pop for population, pop of focus. I might just leave it like that. But see, they also want geographic. So I might do pop of focus. That will be impacted. And then geographic catchment area. I might just do it like this. And they don't need all this. There we go. So maybe that's how I've reduced the, and I'll do it like this. There, pop of focus and geographic catchment area. Or if I'm too limited on space, I get rid of it all and just put number 1. But again, I do that last, like the last day when I'm about ready to submit. And then, so then I'll go through and do the same thing here. Make this all caps. And then, and I go and I get rid of these numbers. I just take the numbers off. What was it called? No, I call none. There we go. And then you can just use your little ruler thing here and get these all formatted in line like that. I'll make them all bold and italics. And now I'm going to go separate them into prompts again. So this was one prompt. This was another. I call these subheaders or prompts. These are all the prompts. I'll tell you where everyone goes wrong on this one. Provide a chart or graph depicting a realistic timeline for the 5-year project, period, showing dates, key activities, and responsible staff. Often one of these will be left off. They'll do a 5-year timeline, but they don't show the key activities, or they don't provide the target date, or they don't show the responsible staff. But you see how it says these required activities should include the required activities under that section? When I see that, I'll literally right now, I'll go right back to the grant. Let's go back to now let me see if I do this right. I'm going to go back and share. Wait, how do I do this again? I go back, your screen sharing, okay. And new share. And I'm going to go back to the RF, or what is it called? Funding Opportunity Award. And that is here. Okay. Now, remember that we saw, here's we're going to go back and find all the required activities. And I'm going to show you literally how easy it is to make sure you grab all the required activities. And I'm going to paste them. I'm going to paste them in twice. Key personnel, come to mama. Where? Here they are, required activities. I'm even going to grab this full program. This one says full program implementation. So that's a correction from when I told you earlier that they don't always say full program. You can sometimes stage them in. In this case, they wanted all 4. I'm even going to see these other expectations. I'm even going to grab those because they really want you to do these things. I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back to my little template that I'm creating. And I am going to, this one I already, wait a minute, I took you to the wrong paper. Hold on, right here. Here it is. Okay. So see where it says provide a chart or graph? I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to paste in all of that stuff. I'm going to go ahead and put it in. I'm going to put it in Times New Roman 12. I'm going to get rid of all, look how this was, it already had built-in spacing. I'm taking it all down to 0. Okay. And now I'm going to unbullet it, and I'm going to show you a trick here. So now I got none. Okay.
Star 102.5, Buffalo's Christmas station.
Somebody's got, maybe can go on mute. I hear a lot of like background noise. Okay, so see, we've got now all the required activities. Oh shoot, undo. Okay, now, and we have all the ones that they like you to do. I'm gonna go insert table, insert table. All right, what I've done now is I've literally created all the requirements and I've included in a table. I'm gonna pull the thing here. I'm gonna say insert another column to the right. Because remember it said it wanted, what did it say? It wanted activities and it wanted dates. Here's the activities. It wants the dates and the responsible staff. So I'll put in one more row, column to the right. Okay, now
we can only see your Word document right now.
Oh, really? You're not seeing that I'm doing a chart?
No.
Okay. All right. So let me undo.
Thank you, Noah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. So, all right. Now let me screen share this again. I think I know what I did wrong. All right. So go back to controls, your screen sharing and new share. Okay. Now I'm going to go to, here it is. Okay. Share. All right. Can you see this now? Did you see something? Do you see me highlighting something gray?
Yep, develop
Okay.
policies. Yep.
Yep, thank you for that. So what I did, I literally just, these are all the requirements, and it was also all the things that they called recommended or whatever. And I highlight them all. I go here, insert table, and I'm just gonna insert a table. Okay, now I'm gonna go back, scroll back up, and I know I have to have two more columns. So I'm gonna squish this back. I'm gonna insert another column to the right. That has to have a date, so it doesn't need to be very wide. And then there was one called, I think it said responsible parties or whatever. So I'm gonna stretch this out now to the full limit of the 1 inch. And I'm gonna always give my activities column more room because the activities take up a lot of narrative. So see how I made it take up less. Now I gotta put in, let me put in a row above, insert a row above. And this is going to be called required and other activities. Whoops. And then over here was date. And then this was going to be party for the responsible party or staff or something. And I'll probably like bold this, I'll center it. I'll even go up to my paragraph and I'll go ahead and add a little bit of space to make that a nice little header. I might even go in here and table properties. Let's see, here it is. Go up here and put it into like a light gray, something like that. So it looks kind of official.
These all look so familiar to me, Pam.
I know. Now, these are way too long. So I'm going to abbreviate these, but I'll wait to the end. So now I literally have a timeline almost all ready to go with all my required activities. And now, again, I will just, these will become 1 and 2 sentences. I will, or I might even put ... C FOA for Funding Opportunity Award, page 7, so that, or something like that. But you just want to make sure there's enough that you know and the reviewer knows what that is. Here's another trick. Let's say that these are just so long and you don't have enough space. You can put this. I do this all the time. Reviewer note. Reviewer note. All activities are abbreviated due to page constraints. So that they know, so I might do something like this: develop policies and procedures to promote coordination among youths, to include standards of care for youth, and maybe I go ... page 7 FOIA, something like that, so that they know I'm now, responding to that. So these are all kinds of ways to pick up space. Here's the other thing I often do. And again, here's my favorite part. Look what I can do. I'm going to down this to size 10 font because now look how much room I picked up. Now I like to do 11 if I have the room, just to make it a little easier to see. But anyway, it's in a chart, so I can make the font smaller. the other thing that I want to point out is that because I don't want a lot of room in here to put people's names, I'll do a key, and I'll say, let's see, I have too much space there. I hate extra space because I use literally every word. Okay, so I'll put key. PD equals project director. AB equals advisory board. In other words, I go ahead and I make my little answer key so that for the party, I might have the project director and the clinical supervisor. That's what I'll put. And so up here, I would have CS equals clinical supervisor. And I do lots of abbreviation just so everybody, but so that they can see what it is. And then because it said the full program must be implemented, I'll go ahead and add I'll put in a row here, insert row below. And I'll go ahead and I'll put this little jewel right here and say full program, whoops, what did I just do? I'll say full program implementation. And then I'll just put for the date, 4 months GA. And up here, I'll say GA is grant award. So, and also, if you want to reuse timelines for other grants, it's very helpful to not put the dates, but to always make it post grant award. So you might say, for MOS for months GA, for 4 months after grant award. That way, it doesn't matter if you apply in 2019, 20, 22, 24, you can, it's because even though these are required in this grant, you might want to reuse a timeline for other grants because some of the steps are going to be the same. Now, this would not be the only thing I would use for the timeline. I would start going backwards now. I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna start inserting some blank rows. And I'm gonna remind myself, what all do I need to do to start up a program, okay? So the first thing is, and think about this politically, you just got a boatload of money from a funder. What do you wanna do when you first find out you have a grant award? You wanna give that funder lots of public credit. So because they have their constituents are their congressmen and women or their tribal leaders. So you want to say here, alert tribal leaders and community and project partners of GA, of grant award, for high visibility. Now, I'll tell you a little trick I do. And I know my husband always gets mad. Why are you giving away all your secrets? But I'm a karma person. So I put it all out there and I think I keep getting it all back. I am going to show you something else I do for extra points. Let me see, wait a minute now. How do I do this? I go to layout. Oh no, I know. Before I turn it sideways, I have to put a special page break. So here I'm going to put this is why I use the little picture, what do you call the paragraph markers, whatever they're called, show hide. I'm going to go look for page breaks. Nope, that's not the one I wanted. I've got to go to review. Review has the good page breaks that give you the special ones. Wait a minute, is it view or is it layout? Yes, layout. If you go to layout, the layout tab, and you go down to breaks, you want the one called next, is it called next page? It's called a section break, see, next page. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that break in. I'm gonna show you what it looks like, just like that, section break, okay? And then I'm gonna put one after the chart, right here. I'll give myself one extra space just in case I need it. And I'm gonna go, where did I say that was again? Was it layout, and I'm going to go to breaks, and I'm going to do another next page section break. Okay. So now you see I've got a section break after the chart. I have a section break above the chart. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my cursor on the page, and I'm going to go to orientation, and I'm going to go to landscape. Now this part of my grant is going landscape. I'm going to stretch it out. Oops, wait, I don't mean to do that. I want to add, I always add a column called milestones, even though it's not requested, although sometimes funders will. And so this is like just suck up points. That's really what this is. And so I'll say something here like the milestone. So maybe instead of for high visibility here, because that's, I take this off. Okay, so I'm alert tribal leaders, community, and project partners. Maybe I'll put even consumers, just be inclusive, consumers and project partners. And the milestones, high visibility will promote sustainability. And so, and I realize I got to make this whole thing Times New Roman. So that's just a little bit of an extra thing I do that is, and I have this pretty much down to a science now. Now let's go do another one. Now, by the way, because you're wanting to limit your space, you can always move, you can stretch these. If when you're all done with your chart, you see that it's really heavy on this side, then you might slide your line over a little and jam it up somewhere else. But let's think through what are all the things that you would do. So if you were, so the first thing you want to do, let everybody and their brother know that you got this grant. You might even want to do a ribbon cutting or something like that. So you also want to hire staff, but you don't want to just write hire staff. You want to hire, or you say hire and or finalize, because maybe you already have some staff. In fact, I would just say, I would not even say hire. I would say finalize staff from ready applicant pool. So what does that say? Like, I'm not going to be out exploring the feasibility, the potentiality that I'm going to find some staff. I already got them all ready to go. I have a ready applicant pool. I've already done all my due diligence, and I'm just going to finalize the people that I liked for the jobs. Now, you only can say this if it's true, but I'm telling you that if you're a reviewer and I know that you haven't, that you've already done some of this work and you're ready to roll, I'm going to think more favorably of you than if you're going to be starting from scratch, sending out announcements. And I might even, from ready diverse applicant pool, or if you're wanting native workforce, I would say from native workforce applicant pool, or be as prescriptive as you can. I'm also going to want to have a kickoff meeting. Okay, let's go back to what would the milestone finalizing staff from ready applicant pool would be. I would say prompt startup, or prompt startup, prompt implementation startup, or something like that. In other words, you're sorry about that, implementation startup. Kickoff meeting, buy-in is increased from project outset. So you see where I'm going with this. In other words, I'm, sorry about that. I'm going through all the different things I would do, and then somewhere I'll probably go ahead and move my full project implementation one up and put it, when I'm done rambling, always when you're doing a paste like that, go to your special paste, and then it won't mess up your formatting. There we go. So anyway, I just moved that one up. But then I'll go through here. So you can see that I almost, I have almost everything I need. Now, then you go through all your required activities. Here where it says SAMHSA strongly encourages recipients to adopt a tobacco, I would just stop there and I would say, adopt a tobacco nicotine inhalation vaping product-free facility and then instead of to promote abstinence, that's really the milestone, or maybe I'm not even using the word milestone right. You might change it a little bit, but I might put that over here to, you know, I would say abstinence will be promoted. Abstinence from tobacco, whatever, will be promoted. So anyway, I think you see what's happening here. You just go through and you make these adjustments. So now we're going to go back to, and you go do this all the way through. I do want to show you that the other thing I do, so pretend that I had not yet pasted in this cool chart. Oh, by the way, let me say one more thing. So let's say that you're all done writing your grant and you have a bunch of white space here because you turn the page sideways at this other place. What you can do, and this may or may not make sense at this stage, but I might have to do this again later. You can literally, so that you miss no white, you don't leave any white space or too much white space, you can borrow, let's say that this section B here, pretend I had filled all this out and I had a lot of narrative. I could literally cut that and paste it here and let it go sideways as well. In other words, if that's what I needed to do to make my pages work out perfectly, or I could have done that at the end. I'll explain that part again before we're done with all these modules so that you'll see what I mean. But I'm going to now share a different screen because I want to show you, in addition to pasting the whole writing template down, I do it twice. And the reason that I do it twice is, oh, here we go. Your screen sharing. Okay, I want to new share. The reason that I do it twice is that I also make a to-do list from my, I make a to-do list from this. Okay, so this is, and I'm just going to show you, I'm not going to do the whole thing just for time, but I'm just going to show you once I get it formatted right, again, removing the numbers, using my little ruler here, which you can find, I think, under view. And because this is going to be an internal document, I don't change the font. I am going to go ahead and eliminate all spaces, keep it single spaced. Whoops, I see a space there and I see a space there. That's why I like to use this little thing here. Okay, are you watching what I'm doing now? I'm going to insert a table again. Insert table. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a insert a row above. Okay, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to create 2 more columns. Insert column to the right, and then oops, come on. And this is going to become what I call my action list or my action template. And I'm going to insert another column. Okay. So this is going to be called, I'm going to go ahead and merge this in. Okay, so this is section A. And I'm going to say who and when. And then I'm going to call this just section, or I'll call this prompts. Oops. I'm actually going to move this section A.
People like this, Pam. They said this was helpful.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
Forward and functional and great. So.
And that's how I have to do things. It has to be very practical. A special. Okay, there we go. Now, who is going to answer this question? Who's going to answer this? I might do this, and I might assign this to you. You know, when is it due? You know, again, you don't really need a lot of room on the who and the when. So I always, and it's amazing how many grants I'll review where I see totally uniform columns. And I'm like, wow, you wasted all that space. So anyway, this is where if you want to assign different people on your team, who's doing what, who's going to answer this, and you could just go down the whole grant and do this so that you've got, you know, you might even go to the header and call this your action timeline or something, or your action list. And so anyway, that's, so now you've got this, and so you use the template right out of the text for multiple purposes. Okay, let me check on time. All right, we're going to go back to the PowerPoint. And I'm now going to new share, and we're going to go back to PowerPoint. Let's see if this is it. Okay, are you now back on the outline, or does it say PowerPoint?
Yeah, it's the outline.
Good.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Okay, so now we know how to do that. And so respond to each individual item in those prompts down to the actual detail. And if you don't know it, like Samsa's good about saying, describe population of focus, for example, age, gender, gay, lesbian. If you don't know something like gay, lesbian, transgender, those data are not always available. What I might say is applying national gay, lesbian, transgender data against my tribal population would mean that 6% of my tribal members would be two-spirited. And then I'd take, and so in our tribe of the, you know, Sisseton and Wahpeton tribe would be 400 people. You know, in other words, you might apply a statistic against your large number or small number, however big your tribe is. So I answer every item on the prompt, even if I don't have the exact data, I get as close as I can. So again, if you have questions, call your funder. And I do violate the white space rule. I know there's a rule around you want to be able to have, you don't want just all this crammed text. But you know what? I also know that if I need to use every inch that I have, that I'm legally allowed to use to answer every single requirement and every item, I will take it. I would rather know that I am technically compliant than that it's pretty. But I will make sure that there's plenty of charts and graphs to break up the long rambling narrative. And so you can't usually use filler like newspaper articles and things, but you can quote things, compelling things out of newspapers, you know, to show that it's, you know, the drug problem is so bad in our community that it makes the front page news. And you could even say 9 out of the last 10 headlines of our local newspaper reference drugs. So if you want to reference other sources other than the data that you might select from surveys. Let's see, these are budget sections, making sure on your budget that it lines up with, a lot of times they'll say they want a 3 or 5 year budget and grantees turn in a 1 year budget. So just always make sure that you do all of these things as it's required. Make sure that the budget line items are reasonable. We did get a bad score on one that said, I think we had asked for a bunch of equipment and they said that we could have shared some of the equipment. I think we were asking for those things that project PowerPoints, the LCD projectors, and they said, sorry, these were too expensive. You should share, use 1 or 2 for the tribe and just take it with you when you go on the road. I thought this was a great quote. Your budget will tell the funder instantly if you know what you're doing. Sometimes the budget will have absolutely nothing to do with what the person in the narrative wrote. So these are really key, that they should work hand in glove. And so consider your grant as a story, that you're telling a story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a price tag. All of that has to make sense. Also make sure that that you've got the right allocation of staff, that you don't have a super big important role and then have the person at like 5%. This has to all make sense. You know, don't gouge, don't put expensive laptops. If you can get a decent one for $750, don't put one in for $3,000 or whatever. Just, it should be reasonable. Also, your job descriptions should be realistic. And we're going to spend some time on some of these templates next time. And I have created sample job descriptions that are really good that the ATTC has on their website. I did it for tribal opioid response, and I did it for the mental health ATTC. I have a good one for a project. Let's see, tribal opioid response, you can get a good project director job description, and I think you can get an outreach coordinator. And then on the mental health TTC, I did a good one for a project director and one for a family coordinator. They're really tight. They really map back to what the funder wants. You can beg, borrow, and steal those, edit them as you will. But it'll give you a good idea of what a really tight, and I map it right. I'll paste literally the required activities in abbreviated form into a job description. I'll divvy up all the required activities. Who's doing this? Is this a project director? Is it the finance director? Is it an outreach coordinator? Whatever those required activities, you'll find them in every job, the relevant job description. So you'll see a continuity from beginning to end. If there's a budget associated with a relevant activity, that'll be in the budget. Assign a reasonable deadline a little earlier than you need, just to assure you don't have a last minute scramble. Have somebody that knows nothing about your grant read it at the end to make sure, because you will have lived with it. You'll become one with that darn thing. You won't even be able to be objective, but someone else that doesn't know to say, does this make sense to you? We call that the McDonald's test. If you handed it off to somebody at a McDonald's and they read it, would they know what you're trying to do? Sometimes the funder provides checklists to say, did you include this? Did you include that? Make sure you did. And also, once you've dropped your proposal in the mail or hit send, you will think of 5 things you should have included and didn't. Write them down right then, because often you will get what's called a BOFO, a best and final offer, where the feds will call back and say you're in the running for funding, but we have a question. We didn't understand what you meant about item 7 in your budget. Well, if you took the time to think through whatever your problems were after you sent the grant, you might have already solved that problem and you're all ready for them when they call with a question. Don't use a lot of keep in mind the reviewers might be sitting in DC, know nothing about your tribe, know nothing about your service barriers, nothing about your organization, and nothing about your strengths and challenges. So just make sure you're painting a picture that's, helps them as if they were sitting right there. So I know we're out of time, but I wanted to stop and see, do we have any questions? Is this helpful? Because we've got a few more modules over the coming weeks, but wanted to see how things are going.
I'm not seeing any questions yet, Pam.
Is there like thumbs up, thumbs down? Am I in the ballpark of what you're looking for?
There, you got a thumbs up from me, because I know how much info you're giving to these guys is hard sometimes to wrap your brain around it immediately, and applying it will make so much sense once they go to do it.
And this is a 2.5-day course that we're doing in 6 hours or something crazy. And somebody thought they only wanted us to do it in an hour or 2.
Yes.
Are you kidding me? Like, it's killing me. That's why I'm talking so fast, is to even get it all in there. But and we might, if we had to extend and do more modules, we probably could. But anyway, all right. Well, lastly, then, just for next week, if you're up for any homework, consider creating a writing template like the one we just cut and pasted from. And then we can talk in the beginning next week if you had any problems, if it worked out, if you ran into any formatting jams, anything like that. Next session, we're going to focus on creating tools and templates, charts and graphs. So a lot of what I just did with that timeline, we'll be doing some practical real-time creations then as well.
And just to give you a little feedback, yes, it is helpful, very informative. Thank you. The info is great. Learning so much, amazing training, clap, thumbs up. So you are getting
So I'm not fired. I'm still here. I'll see you next week then, guys. Sounds like we'll do this again next week. Same time, same channel, right?
Yep. And I'll send you guys the handouts and everything Pam gets to me beforehand. So always check your email that morning. And if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to me and I'll make sure they get answered. Otherwise, we'll plan on seeing everybody back here next Monday on the 23rd. All right.
Excellent. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.